Alright, now we're going to go into some basic render settings. And there's way too many render settings in V-Ray, or really in any render program, to go over them entirely here. So you're going to need to do some of your own research. But I'm going to go over the basic things that I change every time when I do renderings, and I'll talk a little bit about what they mean. But some of it's kind of technical, something you'd have to do further research on to fully understand what's going on. But you can at least set up your scene like mine is after watching this video. So the common settings, these are all self-explanatory. You want to render single frame for what we're doing. This is for if you're doing animations. Your resolution is here. You want to make sure and render the view. A region means that you're just selecting a region and only rendering that. So usually you want to render views if you're doing a finished production rendering. Okay, set that to view. All this other stuff you can ignore for now. And in fact, I don't even go to here and save my render output here. I do all that via V-Ray. So if you go into the V-Ray tab, here you'll see all our V-Ray settings. So the frame buffer is where you will save your images. Separate render channels. We want to save RGB, save the alpha. I can show you what that means. You click here to tell it where to save. We'll just say test.jpg. Now when you're telling it to render all your separate render channels, those are set up here. Right now we don't have any render channels in here, so all it's really rendering is it's saving the RGB channel and the alpha channel, which is fine. Show last frame buffer, there isn't one, but so we're using the enable. We have enable built-in frame buffer checked here, which means that we're going to use the V-Ray frame buffer instead of the standard frame buffer that's in Max. I like the V-Ray frame buffer better. And the frame buffer is just the little window that pops up that shows what we're rendering. Here you can, okay, so the important settings that I usually adjust. This I set to adaptive. Image filter, to save time you can turn that completely off. What that does is puts a filter, like a Photoshop filter essentially, on your images, and it's either sharpening or blurring filter. So like these softened ones, that kind of blurs it a little bit. They all have a little bit different effect. You can look into the V-Ray website, which I'll provide a link for, that will show examples of all this stuff, and that's something I would highly encourage you to go over. Adaptive image sampler. These subdivisions here are what controls really the level of detail that will render and how much noise is going to be in your image. So the higher, this one should probably just stay at 1. The higher you set this, the higher quality renderings you can get, and of course the longer it's going to take to render. So I think by default it's usually around 4. That means where it needs to really spend a lot of time to render, it's going to go up to 4 subdivisions. That means it's going to be sampling that pixel 4 times as much as other pixels. So it's going to spend a lot more time there and make sure it's more precise, more detailed, and that you won't have jaggedy edges. You'll have nice smooth edges on your renderings. I think it's actually going to render, it's going to sample that 16 times as much as it will 1. That's on a subdivision of 1, but we don't need to worry about that. Just know that the higher you set this number, the higher quality, the crisper, the nicer your renderings are going to look, the less noise in your renderings, but they're going to take a lot longer. That probably has the highest effect on quality, but also time. Global DMC. So here the main thing that I change a lot is this noise threshold. This is kind of a quick way to adjust the quality of your rendering just by setting this lower. So your noise threshold 0.001 is like a really high quality rendering with not nearly as much noise. 2.05 is more like a draft rendering. Obviously that's going to be a lot faster, but there's going to be a lot of noise. So that's kind of an important setting there. Environment, I've showed you this before, so we have a sky already in our background. Here, default sky. You can override that and make it so that sky is the background of the rendering, but it's not actually lighting the scene. This can override the lighting part of it, and I showed you that already. So if you set this to like a sky blue and you wanted that to be generating the sky dome light instead of this V-Ray sky, then you could turn this on. Color mapping is going to be an important setting. We want to go into the advanced here. And this, I usually use this at linear multiply. 2.2 is fine. This is all fine as well, so enable, you need to set this up properly in your settings. I don't know if that's by default or what here, but if you go to customize preferences and gamma, you want this on, gamma set to 2.2, input and output gamma set to 2.2, and both of these checked as well. And then you can have this gamma here set to 2.2. I'm not going to go into exactly what that's doing, but it'll make your renderings look more correct. If you go to, okay, so GI is the important one. If you go to enable GI, and for primary engine I usually use IrradianceMap. Secondary engine I use Lightcache. And these are probably the most widely used in this tandem here. IrradianceMap has some very easy presets. So low will usually work. Low to very low can pass for draft renderings. And you might want to go to medium when you have finished renderings you're trying to do. However, low can still work on a simple scene like this exterior we're doing, but we'll go with medium. I usually like to have show calc phase on so I can see it when it's calculating it, just because it'll give me an idea before the actual rendering starts what the rendering is going to look like. This is all fine. Single frame, it's good. Lightcache, okay, so go into Lightcache settings. This subdivisions of the Lightcache will change in proportion to how big your resolution is for your rendering. So that's plenty. For maximum width is maximum size of one of my sides of my rendering is 1200 here, you can see, so 1000 is more than enough to cover that. If I was doing a 4000 pixel wide rendering, I'd probably want this somewhere around maybe at least 2500, 3000 possibly. And there's some formulas that are out there on the internet that will tell you what to do, but if it's like 60% of your largest side of resolution, then you should be okay. Nothing else in here needs to be adjusted. Again, you want to show calc phase. Single frame is what you want here. Dynamic memory limit is something you might have to change. If you're starting to get warnings that your dynamic memory limit is too low, make sure to up it, because that will slow you down significantly if you don't have this setting right. There's no magic number for it, but if it's warning you that it's too low, then you need to raise it. Render elements here are a little bit beyond the scope of this course, but just know that you can add different layers to your rendering here. Like, for example, the multimat is one I use a lot. And what this does is make it so that you can take a specific object here and give it an ID, like object properties. Oh, sorry, here. Object ID, make it 1. Actually, let's make this object an ID of 1. Now this multimat will render a mask, basically, just the shape of that object I selected, because it's going to take the red channel, make a red channel for that one object ID, and render a mask of it. I can kind of show you that when we get into some of the renderings. But for now, those are the main settings. I'm also going to put a link to some things out there in the internet. Like I said, to fully understand all this rendering stuff would take much longer than a couple minutes in a short video. Even I'm still learning what some of all this stuff means. There's a great resource out there. It's Spot3D, and it's kind of V-Ray's resource and examples for all these different settings, and it's going to do a much better job of explaining in depth what all this stuff does and give you a good idea of what you're adjusting when you are messing with some of these settings. So I'm going to provide a link to that you can go look at, and I'm also going to provide a link to settings on the internet that people have laid out all their settings, so you can just go match them if you want. Because when you're starting off, that might be all you need to do. But I would recommend that as you move forward with rendering, you gain a better and better understanding of what all those settings are actually doing, so you can have complete control over your results. So I'll put those links in the supplementary material for this video.